What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like magic, and if my comment section is anything to be believed over the last week, then today's deck is the most hyped deck, of course, at standard. Today we're going to talk about dragons, finally. That's right, it took me long enough, but we're finally here. And people have been asking me so much about dragons lately that this is sort of going to be a double deck tech. Most of the video is going to be the main deck, which is 5 colored dragons with a bunch of elder dragons. That's pretty exciting. But towards the end of the video, I'm going to give you just a mono red dragons list that's right around $100, but doesn't play like a budget deck. Lots of power there. But we got so much to talk about. We got to dive into it. Let's go ahead and talk about the 5 color list. Now, both lists today start with 3 copies of Sarkhan Fireblood because this is the deck that he's good in. I don't want to play any more than 3, but this is obviously an awesome card for this deck. You know, the second ability, which is the main attraction here, lets you cast big fat dudes really, really fast. And the first ability helps you find big fat dudes if you don't have them yet. So, and there's a couple of ways in this deck to exploit the fact that you're discarding a card. You can get value later off of that first ability in a number of ways in this deck. But again, what we're mostly worried about here is the fact that he can just plunk down like a Glorybringer on turn 4 without even having to get a 4th land. Or even like a 6-drop dragon on the next turn if you do get a land drop. But let's talk about, while we're all here, the dragons. There are 13 of them in this deck. That's kind of a lot. And if we're talking about dragons in standard, we gotta start by talking about Glorybringer. Bottom line, the best dragon in standard and probably the whole reason I want to play this deck before rotation hits in the fall. A Glorybringer is just a certified monster. Like, I'm sitting here trying to think of new stuff to say about Glorybringer that hasn't been said before, but it turns out you don't have to come up with new stuff. Like, all the old stuff that this has done for like over a year now is more than enough. You know, it's just a big dumb flying guy with haste that's going to punish people who tap out. You know, or it's just going to gobble up planeswalkers with haste sometimes. It's going to, like, kill more than one creature over the course of a game occasionally. It's just, Glorybringer is so ridiculous. And, like, we've got to play all 4, right? Again, just best dragon we can get our hands on right now. So why not play the playset? I'm also going to play 3 copies of Verax Bladewing. I really don't think 4 copies is necessary, but I at least want 3 here because it's a great 4-drop to ramp into, and it's a great card to rip off the top in the super late game where it just gives you all this value, and it's not actually too hard to ramp into in this deck. To finish off the just red dragons in the deck, I am going to play 1 copy of Laughless here. It's not the best dragon ever, but it is another dragon payoff, and we need a couple of more of those. You know, it can't just be Sarkhan and we call it a day. So this is a pretty decent dragon payoff that, as long as you can, like, access your lands, as long as you can untap your lands with this in play, then it allows you to have a couple of options. You know, if you got another dragon in your hand, then you can play it and get yet another dragon off of that dragon, or if you're running short on dragons in your hand, then you can just, like, threaten to get 1 unblocked dude through for a ton of damage. So this is a great mana sink late in the game too. I like that about it. We're ramping a lot. We're playing a lot of lands and stuff in this deck too. So it's good to have something to do with all your mana when you're starting to run dry or you don't have a dragon to play. But enough of those plain old regular legendary dragons. Let's talk about some elder legendary dragons, because those are awesome. Starting with the big chief, Chief Bolas. We're going to play 2 copies. Now, so long as you get a Sarkhan on turn 3, it's not hard to get Nikki down by turn 4 without having to have a bunch of, like, different gnarly lands on your side of the battlefield. You know, Sarkhan will give you 2 mana of whatever dang old color you want. It's usually going to be blue and black in this case. And you'll still have mana left over. Still have lands untapped, theoretically, to cast a removal spell or whatever you need to do. And just the creature half of this is really, really good. People are discounting the creature side because it just looks like a 4-mana 4/4 flyer. It's actually amazing that you get to rip a card out of your opponent's hand. Sometimes it's going to be a Vraska's Contempt or another removal spell, you know, a 4 or 5-mana bomb spell, or it's just going to be a huge threat. You know, you get the Rekindling Phoenix or a 5-mana, like a Lyra Dawnbringer or something like that, out of their hand. That late in the game, on turn 4, whether you're on the play or the draw, if they have any cards left in their hand, they're usually going to be pretty important cards they've been holding on to. So the ability to just 2-for-1 them with an enter the battlefield trigger, I don't know why people are just, like, skipping past that, but that is one of the best parts about the entire card. But if you actually can flip it over, which isn't unheard of, honestly, we got a few different ways of making a bunch of different mana. We're ramping in this deck, so you can flip this over. It just more or less, like, wins the game. Not necessarily on the spot, but it is really difficult to lose games where you're actually able to flip this over. Because look at all of these abilities. Just like, what do you want? These are literally all the best things you can do. Draw a bunch of cards? Yeah, that's a great ability. You know, take almost any creature or planeswalker in Standard right now off the battlefield. Yeah, that's great. Reanimate that same thing later or something of yours that they've killed. Great. Or if you actually somehow get to the ultimate, win the game. More or less, win the game in like 2 turns. Like, all of these are ridiculous options, but don't even think that you're under pressure to flip this over. Again, keep looking at it for a second while it's still up. Planeswalker Bolas is really, really difficult to deal with and will win you the game a lot of the time. But don't feel pressure to flip this over. The creature version is often good enough. A 4/4 flyer is very good. But that can't be all the dragons we're playing. We got to play some Moors. Palladium Moors. We're playing 2 copies of Nicol Bolas' sister here, and she's actually super mean. I really like this card, you know. Being able to play your 6-drop creature and knowing, for the most part, that it's going to survive until your next turn. You know, it's not going to get contempted or anything. That's a really good feeling. That is a load off your shoulders to play a 6-drop creature and know almost for a fact that it's going to survive until your next turn, barring a Fumigate. It's just like almost guaranteed 6 damage, but do note that if it blocks, it has dealt damage, so it loses hexproof. It's not just, you know, combat damage to an opponent. It's if it deals any damage to anything. So it's not a guaranteed, like, Lava Axe, you know, +1. It's not a guaranteed 6 damage or anything, but sometimes it feels that way, man. You know, just the ability to completely be stress-free about having this creature out until it actually does damage is great. And when it does do damage, it's a huge chunk. And by the way, one of the benefits of playing 2 Palladium Moors is if you ever actually see both copies over the course of a game, and you've got one out that's lost its hexproof, you can just play the other one to kind of reset the hexproof on it. But we're not actually done with dragons. To finish off the Elders here, we're going to play 1 copy of the Victus Asmati. And just editor's note here, you could play a copy of Daragaz in this slot, and I think in some ways that would be better. Although, you know, I'm not sure if we want to really fit a 7-drop and try to flip Bolas. We're doing a lot of mana here, if you haven't noticed. Like, this is a lot of 6-drops even, so I'm not sure how comfortable I am with a 7-drop, but if you can fit it, Daragaz is probably the better card, but I'm excited about playing with new cards, and I wanted to try out the Victus. This is actually pretty good. Yeah, there are a couple things not to like about it. It has to live a turn to actually swing in, but that's kind of the only complaint. I guess your opponent could, by a miracle, get an amazing card off the top, but you have always, once its attacks in, and note, by the way, it doesn't have to deal combat damage. It's just once it swings in, you know, you're blowing up their absolute best permanent, and there's a pretty good chance it's just going to get replaced with a land. And yeah, conversely, you have to blow up one of your permanents, but it's going to usually be a land, and you might actually get something better than a land off the top of your library. And even if you get another land, that's fine. It's totally fine. You just replace the thing you blew up. So it's like you didn't have to sacrifice anything in the first place. So if the Victus actually ever does get to swinging, it's a really dangerous card. But we got to actually get these big dragons into play. A lot of them cost a lot of mana. I don't know if you noticed, but dragons tend to cost a butt ton of mana. So we're going to play 4 copies of Servant of the Conduit and 3 copies of Dragon's Horde in this deck. I didn't expect to want to play Manalith in this deck, but Dragon's Horde is actually awesome because it gives us a way to draw cards, and that's great, especially once we get multiples out. 1 dragon equals 2 cards, which is insane if you didn't know, you know. And once you do get to the late game where your ramp doesn't matter as much, or you've got the proper colors in your land base at that point, you can just start, you know, drawing cards, getting gas back. This is actually really, really good. And along with Servant of the Conduit and Ether Hub in the mana base, and yeah, we got to play Ether Hub, you know, we're 5 colors here. I'm sorry. We have to play Ether Hub and Servant of the Conduit while we still have them. These are amazing, along with Dragon's Horde, by the way, for just helping us make whatever color we might need for any given situation without having to pack the mana base with too many different colored lands. Like, we get away without having to play a whole bunch of black or blue or white lands in this deck, but we're still able to cast our dragons via Sarkhan, Servant of the Conduit, Ether Hub, and Dragon's Horde for that matter. We've got like 12 or 13 sources of any given color, no matter what in this deck, thanks to these cards. And no, I didn't play Llanowar Elves in this deck. You're probably screaming at me. I fully expected to play Llanowar Elves at the start of all this. I really did. But not playing Llanowar Elves allows us to play a bunch of mountains in the mana base as opposed to a bunch of forest in the mana base, which we really don't want to do. Most of our deck is actually red. We're trying to get the Sarkhan on turn 3, which Llanowar Elves doesn't help with at all, and we have to play like at least 18 to 20 red sources to get to Sarkhan on turn 3, and just Lana Rails doesn't jive with any of that. So even though I want to make slots for it, I'm not too, upset about having to cut Lana Rails, to be honest. We've still got plenty of ramp in the deck, and all of our ramp actually fixes our colors, unlike Lana Rails. I also just think we could use those slots better because we have to play some removal and a couple of other pieces in the deck. So with that in mind, I'll start with 3 copies of Spit Flame here. I like Spit Flame a lot, actually. Recursible removal spells, especially we can get them back for just 1 red mana. That is very, very good, especially in longer games against mid-range and even aggro decks. Being able to reuse a removal spell even 1 time in the aggro matchup is really awesome. But the secret mode on this card in this deck is that it gives you something that you can discard to Sarkhan's +1 ability and not feel too bad about because you can still get value out of it later. But I'm also going to play 4 Harness Lightning. We need something on the lower end of the curve that we can play here other than Servant of the Conduit. And this helps keep things off of the battlefield. That's especially important because we're trying to get to Sarkhan on turn 3. But if we've just let them develop their board up to that point, they're just going to attack into Sarkhan and kill him dead. It's fairly easy for them to do if they're playing an aggro deck. But Harness Lightning allows us to help keep the board clear for Sarkhan to actually live to ramp something out. That's an important function. Plus, this will give us extra energy sometimes for Ether Hub, and that is super important as well. So Harness Lightning, while we still have access to it, definitely goes in. Now, I'm also going to play 3 copies of Chandra, Torch of Defiance. Again, while we still can. This is another one of the best cards that the entire deck can play, or really just about any deck with red in it. Seems fairly obvious, but this just helps us, quote, draw extra cards, something the deck wants to do. Helps us ramp. The deck obviously wants to do that. And it also, kills dudes. It's a removal spell, too. So again, even if we never get to the ultimate, the other 3 abilities on this are just super priceless. It's always doing something that we want it to do, and it's worth spending the couple of extra bucks to play this card. But now it's time to finish off the deck with our secret weapon. I'm actually playing 2 copies of Yawgmoth's Vile Offering in this thing because if you didn't count, you probably didn't, we're playing 15 legends in this deck. It is incredibly easy to cast a Vile Offering. Now this too gives us a way to abuse Sarkhan's +1 ability. I want to play as many cards as we can feasibly fit into the deck that allow us to cheat and play stuff out of our graveyard that we dumped into it with him in the first place. And this is a great way to do that. 3rd turn, dump a huge stupid dragon into the graveyard with Sarkhan. And then by the time you have 5 mana, Vile Offering can come down pretty much almost no matter what creature is on the battlefield other than Glorybringer in this deck, and just get whatever you got out of your graveyard and slap it right onto the battlefield and kill something on their side. That's just, Vile Offering is ridiculous when you can cast it, and we can cast it in this deck. And as promised, here's that mana base right here. We're playing 25 lands in this thing to help us get all of our colors, but we do pretty well. We're actually playing 22 red sources. We managed that somehow, but we still have 14 green sources to help us play Servant of the Conduit on turn 2. That's important. But we only really have to splash other colors, like black, which does get a heavier splash than the other colors. When we can actually play Vile Offering, I want to make sure we can actually play Vile Offering. So there's a few more black sources in the other ancillary sources, but we still have some blue and at least, 1 white and 1 blue source, at the very least, in this deck to help us cast Palladia Mors or Nicol Bolas when we need to. Plus, there's Unclaimed Territory, which I really only feel comfortable playing 1 copy of. We still have so many non-creature cards in this deck, and we really are only playing 13 dragons, which is not enough to justify a ton of copies of Unclaimed Territory. But again, this will help us cast those Palladia Mors and Nicol Bolas a whole heck of a lot easier. Now here's our sideboard right here, and a lot of this is pretty straightforward, Prowling Serpapart in there. This is to help against the control decks. They can't disallow or whatever janky counterspell, syncopate, whatever, that they're trying to get through. Prowling Serpapart is awesome once it actually comes down against those decks because they have to spend a removal spell on it. But if they don't, or they don't have a removal spell for it at the time, then it's very likely that we're just going to start casting a string of giant dragons in subsequent turns. So Prowling Serpapart is really important against those decks. And we've also got an Argel's Bloodfast in there against control. This is just a way to have an early drop against those decks that matters and will just help us, start drawing cards. Really don't care too much about our life total in that matchup. So a few extra cards is definitely worth trading 6 or 8 life. And finally, a couple of copies of Banefire, because this is another thing that'll help out against those control decks. You know, we don't have all the game in the world against them in game 1, but once we do board, Banefire can just hit on like turn 15. You know, the game will usually go longer than that against control. So once you actually rip this off the top of your library in the late game and you've got all the lands, you know, this can just deal that last 8, 10, 12 damage even sometimes. And it's even more effective because we're a ramp deck. Now here are your power rankings for this one. A final score of 67, which is a very high score, mostly because we're playing a bunch of really good cards. You know, the power score of 9 is earned. We've just got a bunch of ridiculous Elder Dragons. Once they're on the battlefield, they're crazy threats that must be dealt with. When our opponent deals with those, we just play another one. You know, we've got multiple ways to draw cards in this deck, between Dragon's Horde and Chandra, and, by the way, the Sheltered Thicket that we can cycle if we need to. We've actually got a ton of ways for a mid-range deck to draw cards. Once we get to the middle turns, we just can take the game or just turn the corner really easily and take the game over. Because again, it's just threat after threat after threat that must be answered. But if you remember, way back at the beginning of the video, those are good times, I promised you another deck because this first deck is a little bit expensive. So let me talk about this $100 mono red deck real quick before we finish things up here. Here's the list right here. We're playing the 3 copies of Sarkhan in here for the same reasons that we're playing them in the first deck. This won't help fix our colors or anything, but it'll still help ramp into big stupid dragons like Glorybringer and Verax, and you kicked Verax sometimes, that's important. But we get to play Demanding Dragon in this deck because we don't have to devote a bunch of slots to like multicolored Elder Dragons. That leaves room for Demanding Dragon. This is actually really, really good, to be honest with you. It'll take the spot of Glorybringer once Glorybringer rotates, but it's fine to play alongside Glorybringer. You know, it's really good to follow up a Sarkhan. We're really good at that in the mono red deck because we play Sarkhan on turn 3, and even if we don't get a land on turn 4, we can play either Glorybringer or Demanding Dragon really, really early. But if we do get our land drop, we can play our Laughless. We're playing 2 copies in this deck again because we're freeing up slots by not having to play Elders or anything. So we get to play a couple of copies of Laughless in this deck. But that's fine. You know, in a way, this deck has more dragon synergies than the first deck because we get an extra copy of Laughless. And we'll take her. It's actually a fine card, especially, again, if you can untap with her in play. She can threaten to do a bunch of ridiculous garbage. So Laughless is still actually worth playing, as is Dragon's Horde. Again, this doesn't fix our mana in any way in this deck, so it just kind of looks worse than Manalith, but it is still ramp. That's important, and it still helps us draw cards, which again, super important for a deck that's going to run out of gas in the mid game and has a bunch of big bombs it would really like to draw into. Now the removal suite is much more developed in the mono red deck. We have more slots, so we can move in Magma Spray from the sideboard. That's actually pretty important to be able to take out Earthshaker Kinras, Bomat Couriers, whether we're on the play or the draw. It's kind of important. Plus there's like Lightning Strikes and Abrades in the deck. I actually like having 8 different, 2-drop removal spells. We're basically playing the Lightning Strike instead of Servant of the Conduit in this mono red deck, but it's fine. It's totally fine. Sometimes it's awesome to almost guarantee a removal spell in your opening hand. That'll help keep the board clean. That's, as already established, something we really need to be able to do. Plus, since we get to play Lightning Strike, sometimes we can just point it at our opponent's face. That can be important too. And you see there, we're still playing the 3 copies of Spit Flame in the mono red list because in this deck, it's the only way to get value off of Sarkhan's Rummage ability as +1. So I think we still have to play some number of these, but 2 could be the right number. I just don't want to go up to 4. Plus, we're still playing Chandra here because we should. This is maybe the best red card in all of Standard, and it does everything the deck wants. It helps us see more cards, helps us ramp into big dragons, and kills stuff. This is yet another removal piece, which makes the removal suite in this deck, like, really, really deep, actually. We can blow stuff off the board very easily, considering we got Chandra, Spitfire, Braid, Lightning Strike, Magma Spray, Glorybringer. I mean, this is endless removal in the mono red deck, so just another good thing about Chandra. So we got to play this, and since we're making the budget a lot lighter by cutting, Chief Bolas is $35, other Elder Dragons cost money, we're cutting a bunch of lands that cost tons of money, so since we're cutting all of that out of the budget, I think we can afford some Chandras. And you can just play like 25 Mountains. Like you can jazz it up with Field of Ruin or Scavenger Grounds or whatever. Probably Zhalfir and Void would even work here if you wanted to. But, you could just play 25 Mountains and that would also be good enough. But there's tons of ways that you could spruce it up. So that's the mono red list. And don't think just because it's like way more budget than the first list, that it's a pushover. Again, this mono red list is very, very real. Big Red is serious right now, and you don't even have to pay that much money to play it. So if you're interested in trying any of these decks out, just click either link in the description. I'll leave you links to both of these decks. And both links will take you over to my sponsors at DCG Player. They're good guys. They help sponsor my content, and they just happen to be cheapest place you'll get either of these decks online. The first deck, the 5-color Dragons deck, is about $225 on their website, but other folks' websites, it could run you almost $300 in some cases. So I know that sounds like a lot, but hey, compared to the last few decks I've done, it's actually one of the least expensive decks I've done in like a week. So try that deck out if you can. But if you have to play a little bit more budget, try the mono red deck out. Again, it is very, very real, and it's relatively cheap. But I'm tapped out for now, so just do all the YouTube stuff, if you will, on your way out. Just click the thumbs up button. That puts me in more recommended feeds. That's a big help. I would like that, and it's super low effort on your part. So if you do nothing else, do that. But if you're interested in doing more stuff, subscribe. If you're new, we are by no means done with core set standard, and rotation-proof decks are coming up soon. So you'll want to be subscribed. Ring the bell for those notifications. You can also follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev, or if you're interested in supporting the channel, I would really be thankful for it. Just click the Patreon link in the description. That'll take you over to my Patreon, where you can donate whatever you want, but just $1 a month will get you a little bit of access. I'll let you know what decks we're doing the day before I upload the videos, and to let you vote in all these polls for what decks we're going to do in the first place. So get over there if you want to. Help support the channel. It would be awesome. But I'm pretty sure I'm done for this one, so I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.